Hi guys, welcome back to my channel, The Inked Reader. My name is Eva and today I am wrapping up what I've read in the month of April. But before I get into the wrap up, just a couple of quick things. I do have an eye infection, which means that if you see me crying, it's because of the infection. I'm not really sad. And also I couldn't put any makeup on my eyes. I had just to put some antibiotic cream. So yeah, it doesn't look very nice, but I am trying to make it heal. 3 days ago was 3 times this size. It was quite scary, so hopefully my eye will go back to normal soon. And also it's this time of the day is the most noisy one for my neighborhood, a lot of families, kids and stuff like that, so apologies for any background noise, but it's quite hot today. I'm not complaining, but I need to keep the windows open, otherwise I'm gonna die. So before I start with the wrap up, I do want to tell you about the books that I couldn't get around to actually read or even start. So those are books that I will put back on my shelves, and also I'm going to tell you about the one DNF I had. Start with the books I didn't even start and just will go back to my shelf to be eventually read. So I've got The Bird and the Sword. Sorry, the light is not helping. Sense and Sensibility. Sorry guys, didn't get around to this stunning book. Disappointed that I couldn't get around to We Are the Dead, which is a fantasy I was looking forward to. Raybearer, couldn't get around to these, and finally I couldn't get around to another fantasy, which was The Crimson Campaign. The one I did start and I really tried, guys, I really pushed myself to read around 250 pages of these, was The Child Thief by Bram. I know, this is a very popular horror story, which I just couldn't get into. Yes, there are drawings, yes, I appreciate his art style, but this book has two things that I really don't do. And I think I should stop trying at this point. The two things are children protagonists. In this case, like, there are more adolescents, but they still are children. And I just don't care about reading or about children protagonists unless it's a contemporary or like a hard-hitting contemporary story. In that case, I might make an exception. But yeah, I don't care about reading about children. Maybe because I work with them every day of my life. So yeah, I need a break when I have just engaging in my hobby in literature. So no children protagonists, mostly. I don't like it. And also I don't like Peter Pan. I hated the Disney movie. It's just something that doesn't fascinate me, doesn't interest me. I don't know if because of association between Peter Pan and children. I never got into it. I couldn't care less. Therefore, I just couldn't care about these. Will I try more by Bram? I am not so sure. I wasn't that impressed with his writing, I'll be really honest. So I might just you know, it might be for someone else and not for me, and that's okay. As usual, I'm gonna put my list from my least enjoyable read to the most enjoyable read of the month. Enjoyable is the key word. Quality-wise, the list might potentially look different. I don't know. I've not paid much attention to it when I was compiling the list, but this is just how much I enjoy the process of reading the actual book. This is how I based my list. So as always, I do go into more lengthy synopsis in my TBRs, but here I'm gonna try and make it like very short and brief. So at number 9, I have Seven Faceless Saints. I've done an unboxing for this Ferralut edition, and this is a fantasy YA where you follow these two characters living in these, it's kind of based on the Vatican or Rome from Italy, the setting, and you follow them having to solve a murder mystery. The premise sounded quite cool, and unfortunately this is a book that I'm gonna keep just because of how stunning it looks, but it didn't deliver. Now, I wasn't that bothered about the Italian language because in this case I think it was used quite correctly overall, and I did not mind the writing. I think writing was very easy to get into and it was quite good in my opinion. However, I think she didn't manage to create a proper atmosphere. The story felt very surface level, and in a city that I know I've been before, so I kind of could picture a Vatican setting, a Roman setting in my mind. I was expecting to get a lot of vibes of it. I was expecting to be very immersed in the world, and I don't think it was fleshed out enough. The characters, one of the two, it's very unlikable, which I don't necessarily always mind, but in this case she really didn't click with me, so I won't be continuing on the series. I think the idea of the plot in itself was quite good. Unfortunately, I've noticed for myself the atmosphere that an author is managing to create in his or her story plays a major part in me being able to immerse myself in the story that much. And in here, because the atmosphere was, in my opinion, poorly done, I couldn't immerse myself. So it felt just a very meh book. At number 8, I have a collection of short stories, which is Sex, Drugs and Tales of Wonder. And this is a very short collection of stories, and they're all fantasy stories, but they're all based on religious practices or religious myths around the world, and they are also based on 1,000 Nights, I believe, from the synopsis. That's what I could recollect. Now, short stories are really not my cup of tea. I don't remember why I picked this up. I didn't enjoy the actual process of going through the stories, reading the stories, and when I finished one, I didn't think, oh wow, I just felt, okay, that's it, and then moved forward. But what really changed my mind a bit about these is the afterword and the author going through each story and the inspiration for each story, which I absolutely adored. He came out of the pages such like a clever, like admirable author for what he did and the inspiration for it, and the message that was actually behind the stories. The message was hidden too well, in my opinion. It wasn't that clear, so without the afterword I would have not appreciated this at all, would have probably been in last place. But because of the introspection of the author and just how he came as natural and genuine in the afterword, I do want to pick up more by the author. Like, I was very inspired as someone who's maybe one day would like to write a story. I was very much inspired by this author. So would I suggest these? Probably would say check out something else by the author. I don't know if this would be for you, but I also think that if you can, you know, go through the afterword and look at the stories in more depth than I actually did, maybe you can like this, especially if you like fantasy, mystical short stories or religious-based short stories. At number 7, I will put Caraval. This is a catch-up from March. I couldn't get around to read or finish this in March, so I finished now. A very popular YA fantasy, and this is about this girl attending a magical Caraval in order to save her sister. So this was as entertaining as I was expecting it to be. I think Garber has a very whimsical, entertaining, effective for me writing style, and she, going back to what I was mentioning about this book, sorry, catching up, going back to what I was telling you about this book lacking atmosphere, I think Garber makes her atmospheres so clearly evident. It's like I can taste their writing, I can picture it in my mind, I can smell the food that the characters are tasting or seeing or smelling themselves. So it comes really through the pages, the atmosphere, which is something that makes me like her books so much. Not to mention how fast-paced and overall, like, entertaining plot that she has. Now, I didn't love this as much as I loved Once Upon a Broken Heart. I think she definitely developed as an author. Her characters feels more nuanced than they were in this initial one, but you can definitely see and tell that it's the same author. So I will continue on with the series just because I do want to catch up on the Easter eggs and find more about the lore behind the Caraval old stuff without giving any spoilers. And again, her books really take no brain power to read. They're such like a good, easy time, which I'm so actually pleased that I can reach for when I need it. And number 7, I got The Fat Lady Sings, and this is a book that initially I had encountered when I was hosting the book club for my previous company. I was picking up different choices of books that people could choose for the month, and we didn't pick this one, but it kind of stuck in my mind, and then I put it on my Amazon cart and then bought it eventually. Now, this is the story with 2 black women who are living, or at the moment when you start the story, they're both living in a mental health hospital. One has been there for a long time, one has just came in, and you see their different stories, why they're there and how they interact with each other in their journey to recovery. Now, let me just come out straight and say this was good, but not as good as I was expecting. I had also a different, I'm going to talk about the next book in a second, but I had to read this month 2 books of kind of similar themes, and so I couldn't help but comparing them a bit. And although in this one I really appreciated how it was structured, how you would follow one character and then the other one, and both they were very distinctive, I wish there was a bit more introspection of the two. I wished maybe for this to be more lengthy so I could explore more what led the women there. It was clear, but it wasn't as explored as I wished. And I also, on their journey to recovery, you know, they interact, but that is not shown that much, their interaction between the two. And so I felt like by the end, because he had not built up that relationship, it felt like a bit okay, but they're friends, but I have not seen many occasions where they actually were with each other and then building their relationship. So I would have liked more insight in their relationship and the history. Said that it was still a very powerful read, and I really liked the end and everything, so I'm very happy I read it. So as I just talked about this book, I was reading this and at the same time this one, so I couldn't help but compare them a bit. So I'm number 6, 5, don't remember, the numbers are up here. I've got One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I love this cover. I've not watched the movie yet, so I'm just talking about literally the book. And this is a classic about, again, these mental health hospital inhabitants, that one new patient comes in and he brings a lot of disruption. So this one, compared to actually this one, was way harder for me to focus on and read, just because it felt a bit more dragging, a bit more dense than the other one. However, I think this really packs a punch. I don't understand why all like publishers keep putting the preface, because the preface was made by Chuck Palahniuk. I don't understand why they put that as a foreword and not as an afterword, because it literally spoils everything that happens in the book. So please read the preface after you've read the actual book. I also think that it gives you a bit more insight in what the preface is saying if you have consumed the story yourself. So I don't understand why publisher keeps doing this. It's very annoying. So I've learned that I'm just gonna skip it and come back at the end. Now, in my early 20s, I discovered and then delved into the Beat Generation literature. And I found some of my favorite reads. Like, I was very much shaped by On the Road of Kerouac when it comes down to my taste in reading. So On the Road is one of, you know, my favorite books ever. And I've also read other literature of a Beat Generation that I absolutely hated, like Naked Lunch. But this is to say that although I've not explored it all, I delved and know a bit about the Beat Generation literature, and I really like of that kind of literature, how it explores dysfunctional everyday lives and the message that sometimes some of the books I've read really had in them. And also the messages that I found in those books were very much open to interpretation, and you could make your own out of them. And I could see a lot of that in this book. I think the author, I know that the author was friend with a bunch of very famous Beat Generation authors, and so in his narrative I think includes a lot of the things, a lot of elements that I have loved in other Beat Generation literature. And I really loved how this was more about freedom rather than a discussion around what is madness, what is sanity. Although that is definitely in there, it was a lot of themes around what is actually to be free. And I like how McMurthy, I hope I'm not butchering the name, but how when he comes in as a new patient, he disrupts the whole environment. And for someone, these, you know, the whole situation becomes much worse, but for others, disruption is a mean to freedom. It allows them to then eventually become free. So I really appreciated the message, and this is a book that I will want to reread with more calm, more in the right state of mind, because I think there are a lot of themes and sub-themes that I might have missed just because in the middle part I felt like this was dragging a bit, but at the end, Oh, the end I was honestly upset about the end, and I do want to watch the movie now and see how it compares. I know that the author wasn't actually the biggest fan of the movie, and I'm just curious to see what I think now that I've consumed the book first. Tell Me I Am Worthless. This is a horror. I would personally call it speculative horror. It's a very weird kind of horror, and if you've read this and you wanna tell me more about what kind of subgenre of horror this is, you're more than welcome. I would love to know. This is, in a nutshell, this is a story of these three girls entering an abandoned house for the thrill of it one day. Two of them get out, and years later they are faced with the consequences of that night and what happened in the house. And most of the story takes place in the past, so it's them recollecting, telling you the story of what happened on that night and leading to that night. Now, the last time I had a similar vibe, sensations while reading or watching something was either when I was watching Trainspotting or when I read Requiem for a Dream. Now, on a objective note, I think these had so many different things going on at the same time that it became messy. I don't think that everything the author was trying to communicate could come through, or at least couldn't for me. I had the vibe that I wasn't not getting everything that the author wanted to tell me. I also must say that the lives of these characters were so far away from anything that is even close to my reality, what I am living every day, that I definitely couldn't connect with everybody. That felt very supernatural and real, although I don't think it necessarily was. I think it was just the vibe that I had, because again, it's very different lives than any lives I've been ever exposed to as well, or knew personally of people around me. It was also like a plus for this book because it was so far away from my everyday reality that I was fascinated about reading something so new. I was feeling like I was looking inside lives that I've heard about, but I could or would never experience for myself, and so it was like a window in a very different life. And yes, this is packed with sexual contents that are uncomfortable, and I do think they're made to make you uncomfortable. If an horror author can make me uncomfortable, she or he has actually nailed the genre. Like, that is what I'm looking for when reading a horror. I want to be scared, I want to be uncomfortable, otherwise I would just read another genre. And I really liked her writing. I will definitely check out more about the author, and some of the scenes in these were very horrific and they are stuck in my mind a bit, so I do appreciate that some of my best horror ever have scenes that profoundly disturbed me. So although this is not my favorite horror ever, is not there in that list, I definitely think the author has big potential. There is a trigger warning at the beginning, although I would say that this barely touches the surface of how deeply disturbing the trigger warnings are inside the book, so just be aware. They're very intense. I think overall this was a very eccentric story that made me think a lot. I had a lot of questions I would have loved to run by the author. What do you mean by that? Is that symbolizing what I think is symbolizing? So a lot of food for thoughts, and maybe it's another one that has potential for rereading this story, I think, and unpack it more. But yeah, definitely will check out more by the author. Then I've got 3 Parts Dead. This is a sci-fi fantasy, and again, in this one you follow a craftswoman who is a woman, has necromancy powers, among other kind of powers, that has to solve a murder mystery. A god is dead, so there are different gods in this world, and one of them is dead, and so she has to find out what happened to the god and help this city who has just lost its god. I overall really enjoyed this. I think in certain parts it was too abstract as a concept, the idea of these gods and these powers that they have. It felt very abstract and too complex for its own good. So I couldn't grasp fully exactly how the magic worked, but overall I think the writing was good, the plot was very interesting, and the ending was very clever, and the characters were very fleshed out, very layered, and very interesting overall. Even with magic, there are so many more things I'd like to know about craftswomen, craftsmen. I think in other books you follow different characters, so I will definitely continue on with the series. I'm not in a rush. Like, I think I appreciated, I didn't love it so much, but it was definitely very fresh in the genre, and as someone who doesn't often read sci-fi but I'm delving more into it lately, I think this was a good one. Daughter of Fortune. This was my first Isabel Allende. This is historical fiction following this girl that it's adopted in Chile by an English family, raised to be like a proper English woman, and instead she falls in love with a local boy and she follows him when he travels to California with the gold rush. Now this takes place in a moment of history that I had rarely read about, but also in a place I've never read about, which is Chile. I think it's how you pronounce it. I'm sorry if it's incorrect. So I was fascinated by the world and the traditions of the world. Just living that, everyday life for me was very fascinating to learn about, and I felt like I was also learning stuff. I really liked her writing, which I had little doubts about because she's pretty famous. Yes, this is mostly told to you. She writes sentences like, and then this happened and she did that, which led to this, which is not everybody's style, I understand. I don't mind it particularly in this case. In this context it was okay. It does feel though like little is happening because of his writing style, but in actuality a lot is happening. It's just the way it's told to you, it make it feel like less it's actually going on, in my opinion. Questionable choice if you want, but again, it was okay with me. I loved the end. I do wish we had more. I wish that, especially when it comes down to our main character, we were told more about her. We were shown more about her and the interaction with, people in her life. I know that the sequels follow different generations, but there are like a main theme. So I actually purchased the sequel because I want to know what happens, and hopefully because of the style that Allende has, I believe that in the sequel, although it might take place decades after, she might still tell us about what happened to the main protagonist of this book. But I love the ending, and I do want to check out more by the author, which is always good. And a number one for enjoyment wise, like the read of the month that really took my mind, everything else I was doing or thinking or struggling with during my week, and just focus on the story because it was again so entertaining, definitely was Kingdom of the Wicked. And again, I want to specify that this list is about enjoyment, not quality in itself. So this was fun. It was a YA story taking place in a timeline that I can't really pinpoint, but it's kind of an alternative history where you got Strega, so witches, and our main protagonist, she has a twin. Her twin gets murdered by a demon, and she needs to find out, with the help of another demon, what happened to or who killed her twin. It was very entertaining. I also loved how this takes place in Sicily, so there is an Italian setting again, a bit of a theme, and I actually learned so much about even Italian words that maybe were specific of that dialect or that are used in Sicily. I come from the north of Italy, so I've been to Sicily, which is a beautiful, beautiful island, but I'm not so familiar with the words or the cuisine or the traditional dishes that they cook there. So I learned a lot, and I went online and looked them up just to make sure that, the references were correct, and they were. Like, I think, the author definitely has Italian roots and definitely knows her stuff when it comes down to Italian dishes and language. I also appreciated how the romantic tension is created in this. Is the kind of romantic tension that I really like and that really keeps me on the edge of my seat. Technically speaking, there is no romance in this book, so I can predict, imagine things will happen eventually, but this is not romance-packed at all. I loved the character of Wrath, but I also really liked our main protagonist and how she is potentially unlikable for someone, but I saw her as being very determined, very strong-willed, and a lot of the things that happen in here, she gets in a lot of trouble and she has to get out of it more on her own most of the time, or at least for a good portion of it. She's not immediately rescued by, the big mean demon. She is actually fending for herself, and I really appreciated that. I definitely immediately went and picked up the next book, which I am eager to actually get around to read. I think, again, these are reads that really, really take my mind off stuff, which is something that as of now, I'm in a period of my life which I really need these, and so these provided all of that. So yeah, looking forward to continue on. So this is all I've read for the month of April. The book is safe, don't worry, no books were harmed in the making of this video. Let me know what you have read and you loved in the month of April. If you're new, I would love for you to subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Take care of yourself. Ciao!